You're listening to Forge Theater Labs,
a podcast devoted to exploring theater history. Where does that idea come from?
concepts in storytelling.
Is anything that original?
Isn't that just an assumption?
And the creation of theater from behind the scenes.
How do they even do that?
This is Forge Theater Labs.
History, innovation, perspective.
Welcome to Forge Theater Labs. I'm Josh Hsu, your host, and today I am really excited to explore this idea of Fringe, the spirit of Fringe, where it came from, what makes it unique, and why it continues to matter to artists, audiences, and communities around the world. With us today, we have a panel from across the United States, here from Portland, all the way out to Hollywood, down to Pittsburgh, and I'm thrilled to introduce each of these guests. First up, we have Tara McDonough, co-director of Port Fringe. Tara is an improviser and maker based in Old Orchard Beach, Maine. She performs with Yes & Co. and You Should Smile More improv groups, and has been a member of the Port Fringe Committee since 2018. Welcome, Tara.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
Great. And also we have Lois Neville, the executive director of Hollywood Fringe. Lois works in Los Angeles as the co-executive director of the Hollywood Fringe Festival. She is driven to connect artists and the broader community through strategic partnerships that keep theater accessible and create programming that promotes entrepreneurialism in the arts. Welcome, Lois.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Next, we have Dr. Xela Batchelder of Pittsburgh Fringe and Fringe University. Xela ran a venue at Edinburgh Fringe for about 13 years, wrote a doctoral dissertation on world fringes, and founded Fringe University, which uses Edinburgh Fringe as a learning opportunity. She's a co-founder of Pittsburgh Fringe and runs festival services at Rochester Fringe. She works with OSU to archive world fringes and is working on a Fringe documentary. Welcome, Xela.
Thank you very much.
And last but certainly not least, and welcoming back to the podcast, is Fringe artist Chris DeFillip. Chris DeFillip is a Portland, Maine-based multi-hyphenate theater artist, director, lighting and projections designer, playwright, storyteller, graphic designer, and all-around nerd. Chris is the founder of Chimera Theater Collective, an education artist at Portland Stage, and an award-winning international Fringe artist. When not freelancing or creating, Chris can regularly be found watching far too much theater anywhere from Maine down to Boston and beyond. And of course, Chris's motto is Viva la Fringe. So welcome, Chris.
Thank you for having me back, Josh.
We're thrilled to have you. For those of you who haven't listened to it yet, Chris was part of our Design or Bust episode where he pitched a production of Big Love, and we're thrilled to have him back. I'm thrilled to have this sort of varied group together today. And I think I might kick it off with a nice little icebreaker just to help us get to know each other. I'd love to hear from each of you about your favorite Fringe show you've ever seen or participated in and why it sticks with you. Like what sort of burned itself into your brain about that experience. And I welcome anybody to go first.
I think my first experience was with Fringe was the San Francisco Fringe, and it was back in the sort of early 2000s. And I didn't know anything about it. And I got invited to be part of an improvised Star Trek show. And that was it was pretty wonderful. They were like the shows at that Fringe were just like boom, 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 boom. So we would be outside with our little, tiny spaceships and dressed in our red outfits, ready to be killed, just waiting to go in and like set up and do our thing and then leave again. And I got addicted.
That's such a wonderful experience. And I feel like that's always like that first Fringe show you feel. If it definitely hits, it hooks you for life. I love that improvised, and that's right up your alley too, right? So like improv, so improvised Star Trek. Were you a red shirt? Was there a red shirt?
We were all red shirts.
Fantastic. Anybody else?
I'll jump in, and I'm going to be the classic mom who won't play favorites at my own festival. So I'm going to talk about an Edinburgh Fringe show that just like blew my mind. I Runners at Edinburgh Fringe like 3 years ago was a show that reminded me about the beauty of risk and the amount of risk an artist takes when performing and when sharing with an audience. It was a show that was done on treadmills. It was just like pushing the body to the absolute limit, to the point of like, this is dangerous if not done correctly, and the amount of exhaustion you see. And so I think the pushing of the capability of a person was so on display in that show. And it just kind of renewed my respect and appreciation for every artist and the way they push themselves, mind, body, spirit, to do the work they do.
Lois, I have a follow-up question. How many times a day did they have to do that show? Like, as a treadmill show, I'd be concerned for their physical well-being and like how many calories they're burning. Like, did you have any sense?
I don't. That was the nice thing about going to Edinburgh Fringe, is I'm not in charge of anything, so I have very little information going in. But maybe that's why I enjoy those shows in a different way too, right? But I think it was once a day because it was an incredibly taxing, and I'm sure, like, I would just assume based on my background that they have people like ready to go in if somebody needs to take a break because it was so demanding. So I'm sure once a day max.
All I'm imagining is the OK Go video, which is exhausting to watch for me, for anybody who's never seen it.
Yeah.
Xela or Chris?
I had one. Counting sheep it was part of the summer hall program, but it was at King's Hall because they needed the whole venue 24/7 to set up the whole place. And you could either choose to be an observer, and then you were in the balcony because King's Hall is an old church, or you could be on the part of the show, basically being on the floor, and so the audience would watch you. But there was a whole bunch of people that were part of the show, so you got to it kind of takes place in the 2014 Ukrainian Revolution. And when you first got there, the first part of the show, you're eating dinner and they're feeding you Ukrainian food. And then you're dancing with the actors, and the actors are part in there. You're actually not even sure who's who. And then the revolution starts and you're actually given like foam rocks and you're part of the revolution and the rioting. And I guess it doesn't go anymore. So at the end, you're at a funeral of one of your colleagues that you just like interacted with for a whole hour, and you were just like really part of it. And it was like a whole life, like in this 1 hour, and you were part of it, and you just felt so part of the whole thing.
And you were nourished at the start of it. That's the best part. Like I'm there for this is like Fringe dinner theater.
But there's a lot of Fringe shows that give you food, but rarely do you get to riot with the performers and go to a funeral.
Fantastic. Chris.
Yeah, there are a lot of shows that stick with me, but I think there were two that I immediately thought of when I heard this question. And the one that I think I'm going to go with is when I went to Reykjavik Fringe in 2022. There was a show, Tara actually was with me, so she's going to know what show I'm talking about, or one of them. You actually know both of the ones I was going to say. And that is a show called After by 8 Rojo, which is a Calgary-based company that brought a 4-person show. They had it in a small venue with only 5 audience members at a time, and it was no words for the entire show, but it was like a horror show in this like dark, like small room. You were right up with the actors, and it's something that I still think about. One of the couple of shows from that festival that I still think about because of just how innovative and how like that intimacy of that performance and like getting to see that. And they ran it many times over the course of that festival because they only had, 5 people that could be there. But that was one of those shows that like usually with a Fringe, you can be like, oh, I'm going to see when I can see a show and maybe I'll see it. And that was a show that we were like, we're buying a ticket now because we have to see the show. And if we don't buy a ticket, we will not get to see the show because there are only 5 people per performance. And it was worth it, full stop, to see that show.
Fantastic. Thank you, everyone, for contributing to that experience. I just hear this sort of range of shows that we enjoy, whether they be, food experiences, interactive experiences, physical experiences, personal and intimate experiences, participatory experiences. So I thought we'd jump in and sort of talk about sort of where the history of Fringe and why it continues to sort of thrive in these small spaces around the world or big spaces around the world. And so, Xela, I want to turn to you first. For listeners that are unfamiliar with Fringe, uh, how would you define Fringe and what is the origin story of the Fringe movement?
All right, let's start with the history first, because a lot of the different definitions come from the long history of fringes. So 1947, World War II is over and they need to start up they need to get back into the arts, right? Because we don't have a lot of art happening during world wars particularly. And so they wanted to do a festival. And back then, the festivals were usually based around a particular artist, like from that city. And Edinburgh didn't have a particular artist. And they also wanted to reunite post-war Europe. So they decided to have a festival where they brought the best from all over Europe. So like the best orchestra, the best ballet, the best theater, and bring them all into one place. And so they got that up and going. And there were some shows that were not invited to that very first year. And they were like, oh, well, we're going to do it anyways, mostly Scottish. And they found places. We know that there was Macbeth at the YMCA that first year. So there was several performances that came to perform that very first year. And they got great press. So there was great press. That first year, they had to do all their own box office. They had to find their own venues, thus the YMCA. So it was all unique venues because all the proper theater spaces were being used by the main international festival. So you've got this, it's called the Edinburgh International Festival, and that still also happens today. And then you have the Fringe, just the shows that were invited, just doing it on their own, but during the same time period, finding their own venues, doing all their own marketing. And they got reviewed that first year because they knew people were coming from all over the place. They sold tickets, got reviews. That first year, they were called Adjunct Festival and some other things. The second year, Rudolph Kemp from the Evening News said, around the fringe of festival activities, there seems to be more activity than ever before. I do not think we're going to be sleeping much. So the word fringe came from that quote. And luckily, that's a much nicer term than adjunct, or we'd be going to adjunct festivals, right?
I feel like a professor at that point, like a secondary professor.
Exactly. And there's great alliteration with the word festival. So Fringe Festival is much nicer. So, and it just grew and grew. It stayed pretty small. In the 50s, they decided to get together and start working together because they're doing everything independently, all these different companies. And so they got together to make their own share marketing and share it ticketing. And that's the very beginning of the Fringe Society. So the Fringe Society started as just this organization that helped all the shows do what they need to do and kind of make a collaboration together. And so that started in the late 50s, early 60s. And it stayed pretty relatively small throughout the 60s and 70s, but we had this big boom in the 80s. The Assembly Festival, Assembly Rooms, is really one of the beginning parts of this boom because in the past, people would find their space, build their theater, and they would usually be the only person performing there. Rowan Atkins, Mr. Bean, he wrote something about it where he was building the scaffolding himself. They were sleeping in the venue at night, and it was just their venue, their show. And so when the Assembly Rooms and William Burt Coots comes around, we start putting more than one show and we start doing the tech. And so each space, you're sharing all the tech so you can have a little bit nicer tech and still keep the cost down. And that's also helps explode because we can have more, we're not running out of spaces. It starts to get further and further out and you can start tightening it back into this nicer festival community where a lot of stuff is happening very close to each other. And then also what happened in the 80s is they had a comedy, the Perrier Comedy Award. And so comedians started coming in droves because you know that phenomenon where like these TV things where you win an award and then you become a star from it. It was kind of the early version of that. If you would win the Perrier Award at Edinburgh, your career, you're set, right? For life for that. So that, of course, attracted a lot of comedians. So we've got a lot more comedy happening from the 80s on because of this Perrier Award. What else do you want to know? All right, that's
a wonderful thing to sort of where we are now. And obviously that sort of travels across the ocean to the United States. And so, and within North America, there is such a sort of wild difference in the different type of fringe festivals. Obviously, a lot of us are members of USAFF, which, obviously is an association of US-based fringe festivals, which we're all a part of. If you could talk a little bit more about sort of focusing on North America, like how has fringe evolved in North America over the past few decades?
So it started in 1982 in Edmonton Fringe with Brian Paisley. So I think it was, I don't know this history quite as well, but I think it was a Shakespeare festival that the city didn't have enough funding to keep it going. So Brian had this idea because he had been to Edinburgh to start a fringe in Edmonton. And as we know, that's the first one. And I used to have an interest, the history of Seattle next, but Lois informed me at World Fringe Congress that she found out about an earlier U.S. fringe in 1984, paired with the LA Olympics. And so maybe Lois might have learned a little bit more about that, having talked to him.
Lois, do you want to jump in with that sort of background from World Fringe this year?
Yeah, I very little. I could only add a sentence or two, but we, in preparing for 2028 Olympics here in Los Angeles, we've been in a lot of rooms discussing what, the cultural Olympiad looks like, because arts and culture is always tied with the Olympic sports. And that's when we found out the first fringe in LA was tied to an Olympics, like cultural Olympiad. It didn't last long after that. It was like I believe like just a couple year run. But technically there was a fringe, even if it wasn't necessarily associated or like a part of anything larger. It was attached to the Olympics.
I think that's really fascinating because, like, if anybody who's like a big fan of the Olympics, there used to be poetry competitions at the Olympics, right? Like there used to be art competitions. Like it was just as much important to it, and then obviously it faded over time because everybody loves to watch people throw things at other things. Although that could be a fringe show in itself.
# bring back the art to the Olympics, please.
Bring back the art to the Olympics, please. I'm all for it. I am always there for the immersive sort of opening ceremony and closing ceremony anyway. I think that we can open it up to everybody here. Like, obviously, there are so many different fringe festivals. And so I think this is one of the sort of harder questions to answer, which is, what does the word fringe mean to you personally? Like, when you hear the word fringe, what kind of show perhaps do you expect? What kind of organization do you expect? And I think I'm going to kick it over to you, Chris, first, because I'd love to hear your perspective as an artist and then sort of bring it back to our festival producers here.
Yeah, well, I think fringe, like the thing that really enamored me with fringe when I first got introduced to fringe was that for all of the hard work that it requires of an artist, it is also, at least from my home festival of Port Fringe, is a very accessible, like if you live in a place where there is a fringe festival, it is at least $1,000 or more to rent a venue to put on a week of performances, including tech if you are self-producing something. That is not including actor fee. That is not including insurance. That is not including rights or anything. It is $1,000 at least upfront to rent a venue for something like that. To be able to do a fringe festival where you're able to pay for, and expenses have gone up, so fringe fees have had to go up with that. But still, $250 for a 4-performance run where someone does some of the marketing for you and takes care of your venues and your other things, and all you have to do is show up with a show. Like, that is a level of access that is difficult to maintain, especially when a lot of the work that is being done at Fringe is stuff that traditionally bigger nonprofit theaters aren't able or willing to touch because it's not going to bring in the same kind of people or is going to have artists that they can't hire because of their contracts with artist unions and things like that. And so for me, it's really the access of Fringe that is the thing that makes it so special. And then, I've been a part of 4 or 5 different festivals, and I'm sure we'll get to this later. But everything has it a little bit different, and every festival kind of has its thing that makes it unique. And so even if I leave a festival not having made much money, I still feel enriched by like the culture of that festival and the experiences that I had, and that still feels worth it to me. There are still people that I talk to this day that I met at other festivals away from Fringe, or people that came to Port Fringe that are not from here that I still talk to. And I think that's like the melting pot of Fringe is kind of wonderful.
Incredible. I love that term melting pot, because I think like I find so many people that I was connected through, years ago in a different life that still do Fringe today. And not that we ever talked about it, but then to be able to discover that they were also doing Fringe at the same time I was doing Fringe, or I was exploring Fringe, and that was their pathway in. What about you, Tara? Like, what are your thoughts when you hear the word Fringe? What comes to mind?
Yeah, well, I got my start being an artist in Fringe and as an improviser. Like, the improv world is a lot of, I mean, yes, every show is different, but it's a lot of the sort of same thing. A lot of improv is like, oh, we do this format or we do this certain way. And having the opportunity to produce something at Fringe means, oh, what can I do that's different, that nobody's doing? How do we push this envelope? How do we do something crazy? How do I come up with I think my favorite my favorite thing about Fringe might be some of the titles. And I was just seeing a picture from the show I did in 2013 and remembering that I came up with the title first and then had to figure out what it actually was going to be. And it was a post-apocalyptic improvised zombie puppet musical. So I knew I wanted to do that show. It was just a matter of what did that look like. So
I still
and,
want
like,
you to do that show. I still want you to do that show, Tara. I
there's
want you to bring it back, just a one-man performance, 5 people only.
I still have the puppets, Josh, so I could. Um, and I think that's the thing that I love about Fringe is that, like, okay, we're doing something crazy. Let's go. I love it.
Lois, what about you?
Yeah, I think, and there's 2 sides here, right? It's like artist and audience, and that's it's something I'm constantly battling, like which hat to wear in the right moment. So as opposed to trying to unbox the artist box, I'm gonna say for audience, as we're nearing our festival, right? So I'm in full audience mode. It's theater for everyone, and it kind of goes to that access. So it's an affordable ticket more often than not. It's also not the expectation. You're not expected to wear a certain thing or act a certain way. Oftentimes, you can walk into a 99-seat black box or into a cemetery or a cafe. It's theater for everyone because there's no built-in expectations. And so I also think in that way it's building new audience for theater, and it's reminding us that theater is accessible financially, physically, emotionally, societally, in every way. Theater is ours as a community.
I think that's such a wonderful catchline, because I do find that when audiences come to a Fringe show that have never been to a Fringe show, there's always like, I never knew this existed. And there was an audience member last year who was like, how do I get involved? How do I do this in my own community? Like, it just lit a fire under them. And I think they had never sort of thought that this kind of theater existed. And this is like a small town festival, right? So like, I think there is power in that. I sort of talk about like a friend who got into theater because they came to see a Fringe show because I was working that festival, and I was like, hey, you should come see it. And they saw it, and it was life-changing for them because now they're an avid theater goer. What about you, Xela? Anything personally that Fringe means to you
Well,
beyond?
personally, I was going to get really academic on that.
Or you could go academic, either way.
Okay. Well, so the original I've kind of broken it down to 3 meanings that change over time. The first one is Fringe of something else, right? So originally Edinburgh and Adelaide, Avignon, they were fringe of a main festival. And so that stayed for a while. And then when we've got Canada with Brian Paisley in 1982, he wants to run this like open access festival. And so it becomes, that's what he pulls from Edinburgh is the open access. Not having a major festival to be the fringe of, he pulls the aspect of open access from that. And so we see a lot of that in Canada being like the primary structural aspect of it. And then when New York Fringe comes along, they decide to curate the Fringe. This is the original New York Fringe, not the current day New York Fringe. And so they're curating it so it becomes more of a style of show, wacky, zany, shorter, unexpected, less traditional. And so I see those three meanings kind of coming and changing throughout the time, but some of it comes out of the different structures and changes how festivals produce and structure themselves after that as these changes of meaning come through.
That's so fascinating that like there is this meaning of fringe for each generation of fringe artists and what that means. Like for me, to me, fringe has always been on the edge, right? It always means like we are pushing the envelope, whether it's physically, whether it's emotionally, whether it's, audience experience wise. There's something that is always like a little bit perhaps subversive, if not like makes me uncomfortable on a certain level. And I relish in that sort of experience. Thank you all for sort of expressing sort of that background. We're going to take a short little break, and then we're going to come back and we're going to talk about sort of the nuts and bolts of like building a fringe festival and what that looks like in practice when you're actually running a festival. We'll be right back. This is Forge Theater Labs, and we're talking about the spirit of fringe.
At Forge Theater Labs, we're building bold, imaginative theater, supporting new artists, new stories, and new ways of experiencing performance. We're proud to share that Forge Theater Labs is now a sponsored project of Fractured Atlas, which means your donations are tax deductible and directly support the creation of this podcast, live tapings, and artist-driven projects. If our work has inspired you, made you think, or brought you closer to the theater community, we invite you to help keep it going. You can make a donation by visiting forgetheaterlabs.com for our link to our Fractured Atlas page. Every contribution, big or small, helps us forge new pathways for artists and audiences alike. Thank you for being part of our community.
Welcome back. I'm Josh Hsu. This is Forge Theater Labs, and we are talking to fringe artists, fringe leaders from across the nation. In this next segment, we're going to focus a little bit more on how festival leaders experience it. Many of us are artists and we've been on Fringe from the stage, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in the latter half of this episode. But I thought we'd sort of focus in on sort of that experience of developing a festival. And I would turn it over to you, Lois, at Hollywood Fringe. Hollywood Fringe has become one of the largest fringe festivals in North America. How did that happen? Like, what does it take to support hundreds of artists and productions today?
Yeah, no, and it's interesting this year. So we start our 16th annual festival in 2 days. Insert panic here. But it's the largest festival we've ever had. We have nearly 500 shows, like just a couple shows shy of 500, 2,100 performances at 35 venues. And that's like a huge uptick from our like 430 number last year. So I think, honestly, the why, or like how is it grown? I think like all festivals, like Fringe especially, we're meeting the demand of our community, our artists, local business, our local audience. Like we're meeting whatever demand is there. Otherwise, like why we shouldn't be pushing Fringe on people, right? We're meeting the needs in that community. And the need was here in Hollywood when our co-founders started in 2010. Immediately, there was several hundred shows that signed up. And it's kind of an odd thing in LA. In fact, I heard it from a lot of people from World Fringe that were able to come out to LA to be here for our program launch and spring preview last week. And I heard like the feedback, like I never understood why Fringe would be possible or needed in LA, because it's, there's actors everywhere and film and TV, and the whole city is all about the art. But having seen it, they're like, got it. Like, I do see it now. Like, we're on the fringe of TV and film. And I think more than anything, and kind of digging into that artist unboxing of like how we support the artist and what it is for the artists, we're kind of filling a gap that is, I know it exists industry wide, but I think especially in cities like LA, where you have kind of no in between for career advancement or career growth, or to learn how to be a self-advocate or a entrepreneur within your field. I went to performing arts school, and I was taught how to sing and dance and how to wait for permission. And like, that's, bullshit, I hope that, but I think that Fringe offers that opportunity for, you don't need permission. Here, the gate is open. And not only that, but we will help you gain the tools necessary to be successful, not just at Fringe, but in whatever you choose to do next. So I think of it as very much a filler, a gap filler for artists who are on to jobs that are going to be maybe more financially sustainable and better like careers in the long run. And that, I think, is why Fringe in Hollywood has become so large, is because there are so many artists in this in between, post-school, pre-career, and Fringe allows them this space to build community, build like the toolkit that is necessary, and express themselves.
I love this idea that, Fringe is a tool sort of for the in-between, and sort of also for the experienced sort of developed artists to sort of, find that way to hone their craft. What have you found is the largest challenge? I mean, because LA is such a sort of expansive city, it, there is the greater Los Angeles area. So like, what is the biggest challenge of sort of managing a festival that's so spread out like that?
Yeah, we thankfully, Los Angeles is huge, but we operate in about 3 square miles of the city. So the Hollywood area, give or take. So is it walkable? Absolutely not. Nobody walks in LA. But it is quick drivable. And so it is a little more compact, and we have like zones so people can, see multiple shows in one day. But I think, honestly, I don't know that our like operating hurdles are any different than every US festival or artist. I think the arts admin and the artist is having a very similar struggle, especially right now. There's no funding for the arts. There is no support for the arts in any way. And I think so our biggest like hurdle is like managing expectations, and managing not just what we want for the artist and what we want for the audience, but what is possible and what can be expected. Like, there's a lot that's possible, like it's possible to become Fleabag. It can't be expected. And like, what does that look like to really build expectation in reality, and not kill hope, right? But I think and that comes with the lack of finances and what we're capable of with hourly rates, and only able to do so much with a team of 6, but also just the realities of our industry, and not coddling to the point of like hurting the artist later because they're not getting the real information. Does that answer the question?
I think, yeah, absolutely. And I think that's sort of important, sort of like being honest with the artist about what's capable, what's there.
Yeah.
I've noticed something about Hollywood Fringe, which is you don't go away, right? It's not like you disappear after the festival. You have programs year round to support the artist. How did that sort of evolve and come about? Because that wasn't always part of the festival.
No, yeah, a little bit of masochism and a little bit of just like loving what we do so much. No, I think it's just the longer we were around, the more need we saw. And I think that's what we all do as arts admin, right? We're not in it for the money and the glory. Otherwise, whoops, wrong career. But we do it because we genuinely see the need for the work that the artists are bringing, the need for, our world to change, and we all know that art will do that. And so the year-round programming came about as a way to continue to provide resources, continue to keep community together, because once a year isn't enough. And so we're hoping to do more of that, but right now we do a lot of workshops and town halls and a podcast and funding the arts, which has become kind of our mission as of late. It's a mixture of curation and open access at our festival, so that we can actually commission work and make sure that we're funding the work that we need to see right now.
Interesting. I sort of want to pivot over to you, Tara, because Port Fringe has, right, obviously a different sort of identity and a different scope right there. Full disclosure, people, I love Port Fringe. I'm also on the Port Fringe Planning Committee. This is why I'm talking about this on this podcast. That is, I believe in it. I fully believe in it. So Port Fringe has maintained a strong volunteer identity. And so, Tara, can you talk a little bit about that, like what it means to be part of this Port Fringe Planning Committee and festival co-directors?
Yeah, we are an all volunteer run Fringe festival. That's baked in. So that means any money that comes in through the box office goes directly to the artists, which is insanely important to me. And I remind myself of that as I'm like not sleeping enough and forgot to eat vegetables for a couple of days. That like it's important. Um, it's I think having it be all volunteer run is a huge part of what makes our festival our festival. Um, it's very affordable to produce. I think we're probably one of the cheapest festivals. Also, nobody's getting rich but like nobody's getting rich producing the festival. Nobody's getting rich like doing a show in the festival. Um, I don't know. College me would say something about how it keeps the pureness of the art, but I don't think that's it. It just makes it so. One of my jobs on the committee is to be the artist liaison, which has its challenges, but it also means that I get to talk to the artists like throughout the process and remind them of things like, yes, you do in fact have to get rights for your show. Or we have a show this year, the first show that I know of that's it's about growing up with a disability. And so this is someone who hasn't produced a show before or possibly like written a show before. So there's been a lot of hand holding there. If I was paid by the hour, there's no way. There's no way this festival could happen. So I can like do my regular job that pays my rent and then also give the rest of my time to making Fringe happen.
I also think that, like, our ecosystem is obviously a little bit smaller when it comes to the arts compared to, let's say, a large city like LA, where LA has like, what, 4 million residents, and then we have like 80,000. So there's obviously a different sort of, right, there's a different economy right there. What would you say, Tara, and Chris, feel free to jump in here. What role does Fringe play in our Portland arts ecosystem? Just because obviously we heard from Lois a little bit about that. Like, how does it serve our community, in your opinion?
Yeah, I will start, but I think Chris is going to have a lot more to say about it. It's it's a place where people from different walks of the Portland art scene can come together for the week to 10 days of the festival. So like we get to see like there's people who do, you know, I'm not going to try to say all of the places that people produce because I won't think of things, but it's a chance to get like maybe a little sampler pack of what's what's out there, who's doing things. Um, Chris, I'm sure you can be more articulate. I feel like I'm not saying so at all.
It's I think it's a fair way to start. I think so. We're in Maine. Maine is a very small state. The population of the state of Maine is equal to the population of the greater Boston metro area. And we're also only 2 hours away from Boston. And for being 2 hours away from Boston and being a small city, we have almost too much theater for as small of a city and community as we are. Before the pandemic started, as my bio indicates, I see too much theater and too many events. I go all the way down to Boston regularly to see shows in addition to stuff locally. And there was a period of time where I was doing a roundup of everything happening within 45 minutes of Portland. And I was running out of Facebook tags to tag all of the events in the companies because of how much stuff was happening prior to 2020. And some of that has just started kicking back up again, but there are so many pockets of people, so many different groups of performers in this area that some people, the only time that they produce with the people that they produce with, or the only time that they do something is Fringe. And some other people, they work with other companies and then they take people that they work with there and they do something there. And it's a great compliment to, where with us being a smaller area that is slightly outside of the bigger metro areas where there's more people to do, Maine is a overwhelmingly white state. And so it is harder for us to do shows about people of color because we don't have in our local community as many people of color to do those shows. Whereas Boston has multiple theaters affiliated with different ethnic groups that do stories by and for those communities in the greater Boston area. And so Port Fringe is an opportunity to both bring those communities into Maine as visiting artists, while also allowing the kind of fringier, types of shows to happen when, the community theaters are kind of stuck with doing the well-known shows that everyone has seen done a bunch of times because they have name recognition. Or the only theaters that can do the shows with those more diverse casts are the big professional theaters that none of the local community can be involved with because they're equity. And so I think that it serves a niche role for this community. And is something that I have had multiple Fringe friends that have come to Portland that have wanted to return because of the culture of the festival and the people that are here, both locals and out of towners that have come here. And so I think that that people are willing to come here, even if they're not going to be making bank, I think says a lot about the way that this small community has coalesced around the idea of Fringe.
Thank you, Chris, for articulating that about Port Fringe for us. I appreciate that. Thank you for the sell. Xela, jumping to you, you're obviously down at Pittsburgh Fringe. And so tell us a little bit about how that identity is slightly different, how that feels different to you than perhaps even Rochester, where I know you do festival services.
So answering the question that everyone else is one of the things I know, and I think Chris already talked about this, is being a platform for the artist. Again, getting your own venue and such is super expensive. So being able to have a cheaper or easier time using the festival, I think is super important to our locals. We also have a collab with Point Park. And actually, we work with a lot of the different universities, but our collab with Point Park is they have a Point Park Fringe that's part of our Fringe. And so the students get these opportunities within that a little bit more, even more affordable and even more handheld structure. And the one thing about Pittsburgh is that we are very early in the year. And so I know a lot of people use our festival as sort of a jumping off point for the rest of their tour. So we're really small, pretty affordable. So we're kind of the practice Fringe where you come figure things out, try it out. We used to, before 2020, have a really good award and review system. We've been trying to pull that out back up again because we lost the organization over COVID that did that for us. But we're getting pretty good at that, bringing that back up. So in the past, people would take those awards and reviews and use that for the posters and get their tour off and going. But that's also was really good for the out-of-towners to come and intermingle with the locals because that gets the locals to think bigger. And so we also do a lot of help with getting them off to other fringes. And we have seen a lot of our locals going to, one's going to Edinburgh this year. Some of them are off on tours. So I really love these people who would have never thought, I mean, it's so hard to even get a space to perform, to be able to not only perform locally, but then use that as the jumping off and the learning from interacting with these other people to go off on tour.
Chris, you have something to say.
Yeah, you mentioning that actually reminded me that like Port Fringe, I'm not on the Port Fringe committee, I promise to these viewers, but um, uh, but Port Fringe is a CAF fringe as well as being USAFF, and as a CAF fringe, they are part of the CAF lottery, and also is it conflicts with Montreal Fringe often, but it's very early in the CAF cycle as well. I think it's Orlando, then Montreal, then Port Fringe, and so I have also had a lot of people that I've become friends with that like they came to Port Fringe, did their show, made their way across the country doing CAF festivals, and then came back for all the Maritime Fringes in August. And so that is similar for the Port Fringe world as well.
And for me, like, I think that that's the exact thing that you were sort of pointing to, which was if we're sort of talking about going to a fringe, like being able to see things from beyond our community and making that connect the dots, like exposing, not only growing as an artist to sort of seeing how art is created elsewhere and what that experience is like, but also being able to invite artists into your community and sort of reshaping that conversation, I think is what makes fringe to me fringe. Um, so I thought we might take a little break at this point. When we come back, we're going to focus a little bit more on sort of the artist experience and what that's like, and we'll sort of pick your brain, Chris, a little bit more. This is Forge Theater Labs, and we're talking about Fringe. We'll be right back. Want to get your brand in front of a passionate, creative, and engaged audience? Forge Theater Labs is looking for partners to sponsor this podcast and join us in bringing bold, innovative theater to life. If you'd like to place an ad right here, reach out to us at marketing@forgetheaterlabs.com. It's a simple, powerful way to support the arts while sharing your message with listeners who care about creativity and community. Again, that's marketing@forgetheaterlabs.com. Let's build something extraordinary together. Welcome back. This is Forge Theater Labs, and we're continuing our conversation about Fringe. Before we move forward to our last segment, I want to sort of circle back to Tara and sort of, bring back this idea of like how big Port Fringe is in comparison to Hollywood Fringe. And then Xela, I'll have you jump in and tell us how big Pittsburgh Fringe is in comparison, just so that everybody here gets a sense of that range. So Tara, share with us, how many artists this year do we have at Fringe and how many acts do we have?
In comparison to Hollywood Fringe, Port Fringe is minuscule. But, in comparison to LA, Portland is minuscule. We have 21 different acts, a total of probably about 110 artists being involved, and that doesn't include the volunteer corps. And our festival is 10 days this year, and all lottery except for 2 curated late night shows.
Amazing, amazing. We can sort of circle back on those definitions of curated versus lottery again, I think for any of our audience who's unfamiliar with that. Xela, from your perspective, like how does Pittsburgh sit?
Pittsburgh Fringe has about 50 different, I call it different titled shows, and about maybe 130 performances of those 50 titled shows. We actually have art galleries and such too included because we're a big visual arts city. And then Rochester has about 250 different shows and about 650 performances of those 250 shows. And the reason I kind of distinguish that is because some shows will just perform once, some will run like 6, 10 days or whatever. So, yeah.
Lois, what about you?
Yeah, so it's very similarly. It's like we do individual show versus performance. So this year, for example, we have nearly 500 individual productions or individual shows with just over 2,200 individual performances during the month of June. So it's 3 weeks of, theater celebration, just a ridiculous amount of performances. This is our largest year. Like in the past, we've hovered around 400 shows, and we just had a huge tick up this year. But yeah, 500 individual productions and 2,200 performances at 35 venues. So LA is a theater town. Like, if anyone's questioning that, that is our motto this year.
Incredible. I sort of want to circle back to this definition right here, Tara, of like lottery versus curated. So for audiences who don't know, like to show up at Port Fringe, if you want to be a Port Fringe, it's not like, oh, I decided to be at Port Fringe and I'm going to get in Port Fringe. You got to sign up for this lottery. And what does that mean?
Well, the lottery giveth, Josh, and the lottery taketh away. So the first step to being part of Port Fringe is to submit an application with a small application fee, and then on the lottery day, which has traditionally been Super Bowl Sunday, because reasons, and we do a double blind lottery. So we generate a random list of numbers, and we generate another random list of numbers, and so that we are so far away from any initial any initial ordering and then we assign spots in the order that those double blind numbers turn up.
Incredible. So you never know what you're going to get at a Fringe festival.
Never know. In fact, one of the best times of the year is that because it's all numbers, right? Until we discover what the final numbers are, and then we read the titles, and that is delightful. Because there's no like, oh, I really wanted this show and I didn't get my way. Like, it's all up to the lottery. And I was going to say some of it is wonderful. All of it is wonderful, just in different ways.
Shayla, what about you? What about with Pittsburgh and Rochester? Is it curated? Is it purely lottery? How does that work for you?
So Pittsburgh and Rochester and Hollywood are all kind of the Edinburgh model, where essentially if you can find a venue, you're in. And that's also why Rochester and Hollywood are fairly large, because that model allows for that. And one of the big differences from a structural standpoint is usually the lottery festivals, they're running all the spaces. And people can only run so many spaces. There's a limit to that. And
This is very
to stay
true.
open, yeah. And to stay open access and still limiting the numbers, you have to do the lottery or one of these like things that the different CAF festivals do to keep the size down without curating or picking shows and being more hands off in what actually comes. Then the Edinburgh model is more, if you can find a venue, you can come. Now, Hollywood has that, don't want to talk for Lois, but that 3 miles. So there's some sort of limit on the venues. And Rochester, you do have to go to an application process to get become one of the venues. Pittsburgh, it's small enough. We're just like, whatever we would like. It would be easier if you're in our little main area. But this year we actually open it up and let them be a little bit more free. So sometimes the artists find the venues. We also go and talk to venues and sort of put them on our list as options, saying that these venues are already excited and willing to be part of it. So that's some of the different models.
Thank you so much, Shayla. Lois, do you want to jump in with that sort of background?
Yeah, it's a whole mix of both. So we're in year 16. Like we're fully grown teenagers at this point in the grand scheme of our lifespan. And we started as a volunteer run org, like most festivals do, as most arts like programs do. And we transitioned in 2020 or 2021, I guess technically, because no festival, into paid positions. And part of that is California law. They did a huge switch in California where gig work was no longer allowed under the umbrella. And so like we really had to make that switch. And our festival, as it grew, we had to count on people that we paid a salary to or an hourly to make sure that we were giving what we promised to artists. But as we grew, that became more doable. And so we only have 2 year-round staff. That's myself and my co-executive director, and then 3 part-time year-round, but that's ranging from like 8 hours a week to 24. So still not like a huge, we don't have an office. We work out of our living rooms. And then we have about 10 employees that work during like May and June during the heat of the festival. And then our venue partners all run their own businesses year round, which is I think that's the easy thing about LA is we have these structures in place. We don't, we don't have a lot of people that bring in venues just for the month. They have year-round venues. And so we partner with them. So it adds kind of another tier to the umbrella, which adds a lot of support and organization within that. Now we have, 35 venue partners that we're communicating with on a regular basis that are kind of more eyes, ears, and hands on the festival in each individual space. And then, of course, 150 volunteers that help us do all of the things that it takes, the passing out the postcards, the, running our Fringe HQ and box office space in June. Still couldn't do it without volunteers, but we are very lucky to be in a place where we're starting to have more employment within the festival.
Oh, amazing. I think it's worth highlighting as a producing organization that we see different types of models across the board, and each one has its own distinct personality that comes with it, and each structure works for its own community. And so I want to turn it to Chris, because Chris, you've been to multiple festivals with different models, different thoughts. And so let's talk about your first Fringe production. What was it? And describe it for us.
So my first show that I produced at Fringe, or my first show that I saw at Fringe?
Produced at Fringe.
Produced at Fringe. So the first show that I produced at Fringe was a play that I wrote my senior year of college called Beneath the Steam Grates, which was about a group of people that ended up on the L train heading to Brooklyn from Manhattan, where when they go under the East River, they end up at a station that they did not expect to end up at. It was inspired by my sophomore year of college. I was doing an unpaid internship in New York City. I was broke. I was taking 2 a.m. subway rides from like where friends were hanging out to where I was staying. And many of them were on the L line under the East River. And at 2 a.m., when you're broke and depressed, you kind of think about like what would happen if this train wasn't going where I thought it was going. Also exacerbated by like little children singing the ABCs very breathily and creepily next to you. So that's sort of where that first production came from. But that first production was 2 years into me having I had participated in 2 Port Fringes before producing at a Port Fringe.
Amazing. And so how did that sort of first experience shape you and influence your development as an artist over time?
So I don't know if that production is the thing that really like solidified Fringe for me. If this makes sense, I spent my first year that I went to a Fringe, to Port Fringe. I had enough money. I was just out of college. I saw 2 shows because I could only afford $20 of tickets. So I saw Improvised Puppet Project starring Tara McDonough here on this call as my first show. It was a choose your own adventure improvised puppet project show. It was wonderful. And then the second show that I saw was a show called Waiting for Alice by local Fringe artist Allison McCall, which in 2022 I ended up directing the like full length version of at a local theater when she worked to expand it. The following year, I signed up to volunteer for Fringe. That was at a time when Port Fringe was doing basically 40-hour volunteer shifts for the week. So I was the venue person for one of the venues for 3 or 4 shows. I worked every single one of their performances. That is not how volunteering works these days for tech fringing at Port Fringe, but that's what it was in 2016 and 2017. And after really being involved in that and seeing stuff, I decided to submit to be part of Fringe. And so I submitted this play. It was something that I had. I was like, great, sure, this is something that I can submit. And I did it, and I had a good time, and I started to get to know people that were part of that festival. And I believe that was the first year that he has stopped doing as much now since the pandemic has happened. But Grant Evan Knutson of Minion Productions used to go around to a lot of Fringes and would drive across the country and back at least once a year, seeing Fringes, recording for Fringe Festival artists and doing workshops with artists where he would bring like programs and flyers from different Fringe festivals and see like, this is what these fringes look like and do. And it was talking with him and some of the out of town artists and that second year that I decided to work on a show that I had the inklings of an idea of my senior year of college, which was a solo piece that started. Ostensibly, it was going to be about the fact that I am a survivor of domestic violence. But it started being like, how are we as like humans meaning makers is where I started with it. And it became an interactive Dungeons and Dragons campaign where there was a like 8 possible ending battle with the person that was like my mom's and my abuser, where I could either die or he could die or nothing would happen by the end of that battle. And that show paired with the stuff that I got from Grant, I brought to 3 different fringes that year. It was going to be 4th, but the 4th fringe was going to be in its second year, and then the people that were running it had babies. And life happens when you have babies, including not continuing the Fringe Festival you just started the year before. They're lovely people. And so that following year, I did Atlanta Fringe, Port Fringe, and Fringe PVD, which is in Providence, Rhode Island. And I brought this show to 3 different places. Atlanta was first. I had like a 3-day break between Atlanta and Port Fringe, inclusive of the 2 days of driving that I did to get back from Atlanta. And then Providence was in August. And each of those festivals is very different. Atlanta is very well known for having an audio fringe. So they do a podcasting audio element to their fringe that is separate from the in-person proper fringe, but runs sort of simultaneously with them.
I love this sort of different personality. I'd really love to hear, like, what advice would you give to someone touring for the first time?
Don't expect to make money. And that's not to be mean. That's just to be like, unless you like have a built-in audience somewhere, or like you have a show with a reputation that has been many places that people are going to hear about, you are working from a 0-person audience. And some festivals will have a preview night that you can do 2 to 3 minutes of your show at. But then often, like, and this isn't a bad thing, but like I'm a very like in my intro, it says I'm an international award-winning fringe artist. I've won Spirit of Fringe at 3 different fringe festivals because I'm the type of person that goes and sees shit and gets interacts with other artists and gets to know people. And like when I went to Reykjavik Fringe with Tara in 2022, we went in going, we are traveling to Iceland. We are staying for 2 weeks. Like, we didn't have to pay to be part of the festival because we won an award at Port Fringe that let us be part of Reykjavik Fringe because that we were sister fringes at the time. But we were going into a festival that we would learn, like, was not the friendliest to out-of-town people. Not that they weren't friendly, but like people had to have a reason to want to see you, and if they didn't know you, they didn't come out for you. And so most of my audience for that show was fellow artists, which was great. They enjoyed it. It was great. We had other artists be part of that show. Reykjavik Fringe also gave artists comps to see shows, which as an artist, I love. But like when all of your audience is artists, like we made $50 at Reykjavik Fringe, which is the reality of that. That also being said, I have had a like wonderful storytelling story that has come out of a harrowing experience I did on a day off at Reykjavik Fringe. It is one of my favorite Fringe experiences, despite all of the weird things that happened during that journey. Reykjavik Fringe at the time was like, I got in on summer solstice. So the entire time we were there at 3:00 in the morning, it looked like dusk. Like the sky was bright. Like there was no darkness. We would be outside of one of the venues at 1:30 in the morning and it would look like the sun was maybe about to set. Like that was the kind of vibe of that space. And I met a lot of great people that I still chat with from that. And there are multiple shows after, which I mentioned before. There was a show called Triptych Men that I went back and saw a second time, and it only had 2 performances, and I would have seen it a third time if I could have. that like I saw a whole bunch of different kinds of things there. That was great. But I went in saying, and I said this to Tara, this is a working vacation. I have to treat this as a vacation and as like networking and not as something that's going to like break even. And that's not that someone couldn't break even at that festival. If you had people that you knew there, if you were local, you might have made a lot of money. But I haven't made a lot of money at most fringes that I've been at. The most money that I've made has been when I produced at Port Fringe, because people that I know live here. And I've gotten to a point that I kind of know some things about how to, build out my marketing flyers as business cards or things like that to hand out to people. But I've never been good at flyering the line. I hate it. Like, I love talking with people, but I hate like going up to someone waiting for another show and being like, hey, do you want to see my show? That for my brain just doesn't work. That also means that I'm not going to get those like audience conversions that people that are able to do that might get. And so for me, I know that I'm not going to make a lot of money, but that doesn't mean that it's not worth doing. I just think like, if you can start with a festival that is local to you, that is like, you don't have to go far to do it, that's like the way to get yourself into Fringe. That also being said, it is worth trying to travel for Fringe and starting, like I went to Atlanta Fringe because I had college friends that were living in Atlanta. And now I have friends that I made when I was at Atlanta Fringe, that are still producing at Fringe, that like I could probably stay with if I needed to go down and wanted to do it. But just Atlanta Fringe also happens to land at the end of the fiscal year at the place that I work, or the end of the season at the theater I used to work at. And so like getting there is hard. But if you go somewhere that you know someone, it makes it like you're not paying for the lodging, you're just paying for getting there. Like, there are ways to minimize expenses by allowing yourself to still get that experience. But I wouldn't change, my experiences of going to any of those fringes at all.
Tara, you seem like you have something to say about sort of like how festivals can better support artists.
I just Chris covered it absolutely, but I just want to reiterate what he said. Like, going to other fringes that are not your own fringe, whether you're producing something or in something, or just like go and volunteer and see shows. Fringe people are just so welcoming, and it's such a fun way to get out of your own space, right? Meet new people, see what other people are doing, shake things up. Highly recommend.
This year is the second year for Boston Fringe, and Boston Fringe started because one of the founders of Boston Fringe saw Port Fringe and worked on a show in Port Fringe before the pandemic and thought, why doesn't Boston have a fringe? We're going to start one.
Sure.
To Tara's point.
To Tara's point, yeah. Xela, what about you? Like, how do you feel like festivals can further nurture artists, help them get the audiences they need? Like, based on the advice you've heard so far?
Well, talking about out-of-town artists, Chris is right. You should probably start your out-of-town touring, places you want to go to vacation or places you know people, so you have that base of an audience. But you also do have to work hard, because the festivals are marketing the festival as a whole, but they're not even allowed to pick one show over another. So it's very hard for them to help individually. They can help teach. We do some workshops and things like that, but it is ultimately down to the artist or the artist and their team. And that is hard. And some people don't do well with that. Some people are amazing at that. And that's hard. That's just part of the Fringe experience. And so, teaching them how to do it and giving them opportunities and places where they can get the word out and previews and things like that are very helpful for the artist. But there's only so much the Fringe organizations can do because of not being able to pick one show over another.
Sure, understandably. Like, we have to be impartial because while we are mentoring, while we are hoping to sort of guide them for the most part, we can't sort of, pick our winners and losers accordingly, though we can provide marketing support wherever that is. So, Lois, I would say to you, what would you do in terms of advice to a touring artist? If a touring artist were to come to Hollywood, what would you say would be the one thing that they should do? Whether it be, make friends, flyer, whatever that is. Like, how would you sort of invite them into Hollywood?
Yeah. Okay. For touring artists, I always say Hollywood is a really difficult place to navigate as a touring artist because we're 97% hyper local. So you're really coming into a fully built community and a fully built audience. So I always say, like, come in as a part of that community, ready to engage, ready to meet other people. Don't have that like headliner energy, even if this is like the 45th stop on your worldwide tour. Coming in and recognizing that you are a part of something bigger always helps bring your show to the artists and then to their audiences in return. And then additionally, it's about setting goals and knowing whether or not your goals can be met at the specific festival, because every festival is going to be different. I think we've talked about that throughout this conversation, how different, and each festival offers something different. And so, what are your goals, and making sure they align with what that festival can offer is so important. And so, if you know that going in, you can actually achieve those goals, or even find out sometimes maybe this isn't the right fit, because the festival and the artist wants that. At the end of the day, if it's not the right fit, it's okay to find a festival that is a better fit. We have kind of a very similar festival to like the Edinburgh, the Adelaide, the Brighton, in that there is so many shows. So you're competing, not really competing, but you have to stand out amongst a huge lineup of shows. And so when it comes to like the hustle of the festival, we compare more to those models. Whereas like there's other festivals and I adore them. They're more curated, or they're maybe lottery, so there's a smaller number, which means you're able to like work as a group with a smaller number of artists and share audience in a different way than in this like more competitive hustle. How do I get, every button and every seat is work and not just happening organically. So it depends on really what the artist is ready for and what the producer is ready for, right? There's most fringe artists are going to wear a producer hat and an artist hat. And so I think at our festival, it's so important that they're ready to put on the producer hat when they're coming into the festival.
Amazing. And so as we start to wrap up today, I thought we sort of would go around and do something a little bit fun. And so I'll start with you, Xela. Quick question off the bat. You have one slot in a Fringe festival next year. What's your show title? What's your pitch?
Wow. I'm not usually the person making the shows. I'm usually the person producing the shows. I actually, Tara had that idea. Like one of the shows I was producing, we added the word with puppets because we wanted to make sure people knew it had puppets, because that's kind of a trend in shows right now. So it would probably need to have some puppets in there. And then the other trend I'm seeing a lot is clowning is really big across fringes right now. And I'm seeing a lot more of that in Edinburgh and in the smaller ones. A lot of, I think almost all clowning won Fringe awards at the San Diego Fringe that I just came from. And I know clowning made a lot of the awards at our Pittsburgh Fringe too. So seeing that as a kind of trend coming through.
Interesting. Chris, what about you? What would your show be?
Oh boy. See, so usually when I decide what to do for a show, and Tara makes fun of me for it every single year, is I think about whether I'm submitting to a Port Fringe show or anything else. As soon as applications are open, I usually submit 15 minutes before applications are due, because I do
Correct.
not know exactly what show I want to do, because I often don't. Full disclosure, the last couple of Port Fringes that I've submitted to the curated version of Port Fringe, the late night, one night only show, which I can't just be like, here's a title, I'll deal with it later. I have to actually know what I'm doing, because it's being determined on whether it's happening based on the merits of that idea. And so in that way, like I have to know what I'm doing. When I do more like lottery sort of stuff, I do love going down a little bit of the art title. I will just say what the show that I didn't get into Port Fringe with this year was called, because it's a show that I think could be adapted in some other way. But I do have to check and see if I got a receipt on when I submitted my Port Fringe application, because I don't know if I remember exactly what the title was, but it was like Aiden Zane's millennial revival, and it was like going to be a show that was like a spoof on like a Southern revival, but using like the millennial emo era of the early 2000s, and the fact that the world sucks right now as like a catharsis for everyone. And Aiden Zane is the name that I decided my senior year of high school that if I had to rename myself, I would name myself because I hated my name at the time. So just like goes with the flow on like teenage angst just everywhere in this show. So that would probably be the show I would submit if I were doing a lottery kind of thing. But next year, come January 31st, maybe my idea of what a show would be very different because I'd want to do something different.
Tara, I want to leave it for you because I know you've got a special Fringe show generator. So give us your Fringe title.
Yeah, a couple of years ago, while we were waiting for Chris to make the final application for the Fringe season, I decided to build a Fringe title generator. So it has a title, a genre, and a quirk. So I just clicked on it, and what came up was Lobotomy Fest, a banjo musical with close-up magic.
I'm there for it. We can make it happen. Forge will produce it, incubate it. No, I'm kidding. I have no idea what that would look like. Lois, what about you?
That is the biggest nightmare of my life as someone who loves to be behind the scenes. I'm one of those few arts admin in the theater industry that doesn't want anything to do with the spotlight. I will fully dry heave before I have to go on, do a TV interview. So this is my worst nightmare. But I do think if I had to do a show, it would be everybody's fine and sung specifically because that is like my motto throughout the Fringe process, because so often there's always a hurdle, there's always a fire to put out, but at the end of the day we're producing theater, and I'm not inserting a tool into someone's brain. We're producing a theater festival that is supposed to bring joy and bring awareness and bring light into this world, and so at the end of the day everybody's fine would be my Fringe show, and it would just be maintaining.
Fantastic. Thank you, everyone. Lois, Hollywood Fringe is opening within the next 2 days, so if you're out in Hollywood, we recommend you check it out. And Tara, Port Fringe opens when?
Next Thursday, June 11th.
Great. And what is the season for Rochester and for Pittsburgh, Xela?
Pittsburgh, we're done. We did it in March, and Rochester is in September, so it's a wee bit off now.
Amazing. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Chris, we're excited to see what you have coming up at Fringe next, but stay tuned for more discussions about Fringe in the Forge future. We're always grateful for everyone for coming on and exploring the state of Fringe. Good night, everyone. This is Forge Theater Labs.
This episode was hosted by Joshua N Hsu with post-production by Sam Rapaport.